Let's talk about diversity in culture, These aren't just buzzwords. They're concepts that really shape our day-to-day lives, from who we hang out with to how our future workplaces are going to feel. So let's just dive right in and unpack what this all means for us in this crazy connected world we live in.
Okay, let's kick things off with a question that I'm guessing hits pretty close to home. So, we all know a recruiter can't ask you if you're married or what your sexual orientation is in an interview, right? That's illegal. But what if all that info is just out there, public, on your social media? Suddenly, it's a huge gray area, and honestly, it's the perfect setup for our conversation today.
And here's exactly why this conversation is so important. It's not just academic. Just look at the numbers. The whole demographic landscape is shifting, and it's shifting fast. By the year 2044, the US is projected to be a majority-minority country. So understanding diversity, it's not just a nice-to-have skill anymore, it's absolutely essential for navigating the world as it is, and for sure as it's going to be.
Okay, for our first section, we're going to zoom way in. We're talking about the individual level, looking at those invisible forces and unseen biases that can create some very, very real barriers between people.
First things first, we got to get this straight. Diversity isn't just one thing. It really works on two different levels. You've got surface-level diversity. That's the stuff you can see at a glance, right? Age, race, gender. But then there's the really interesting part, deep-level diversity. This stuff is hidden below the surface. We're talking about personalities, our core values, our beliefs, the things you only learn about someone when you actually take the time to get to know them.
And that brings us to something so important. Discrimination isn't always this big, obvious, intentional act. A lot of the time, it comes from what we call implicit bias. These are the prejudices we carry around that we don't even know we have. They're unconscious, but they can totally affect our behavior in subtle ways, influencing everything from who gets hired to, who we decide to sit next to in the cafeteria.
This question right here, it just makes that whole abstract idea of bias so real. Think about it. Does appearance matter? Well, research says yes. Whether we admit it or not, it can play a huge role in someone's career. There are actual studies showing that taller people tend to earn more, and that we often perceive attractive people as being more talented. It's a really tricky, hidden kind of bias.
And this idea leads us straight to a concept you've probably heard of, the glass ceiling. It's that invisible barrier, that unseen wall that can stop talented women and minorities from reaching those top leadership jobs. And tied to this is something called the leaking pipeline problem. That's where you see highly qualified women dropping out of their career paths because they keep running into these exact kinds of obstacles.
So, we've seen how these biases work on a personal level, but what happens when they play out on a much bigger scale? Let's zoom out now and look at the whole organization. How do you actually build a workplace where everyone, and I mean everyone, can really thrive?
Well, one of the biggest hurdles organizations face is something called the revolving door syndrome. You've seen this. It's when a company gets really good at recruiting a diverse group of people, but they just can't get them to stay. People leave. And why do they leave? Because they don't feel a real sense of inclusion. That feeling that you're truly respected, valued, and treated fairly.
So what does the dream workplace look like? Well, a truly multicultural organization is about so much more than just hitting hiring quotas. It's about full integration. It means everyone is represented at every single level, from the mailroom to the boardroom. It means everyone has access to the same informal networks, the who you know stuff. And it means creating a place that's actually free from prejudice and conflict.
And the way leaders think about this has really evolved over time. It all started with affirmative action, which was really just focused on numbers and representation. Then it moved to valuing differences. That's more about education, training, and respect. But the real goal, the place you want to get to, is managing diversity. That's where inclusion stops being a program and becomes a core part of the company's strategy, baked right into the culture.
Okay, now we're going to zoom out one more time, all the way to the global level. Because once you start dealing with different national cultures, believe me, the complexity just goes through the roof. And the stakes for getting this stuff wrong, they can be incredibly high. Just listen to this story. There was a U.S. businessman in Saudi Arabia who lost a $10 million deal. A $10 million deal. And it was all because of a few small, unintentional mistakes. He showed the sole of his shoe. That's a major sign of disrespect. He used his left hand, which is considered unclean, and he turned down a cup of coffee, which deeply offended his host's sense of hospitality.
So what was that businessman missing? It's a skill called cultural intelligence, or CQ for short. It's your ability to read a room, to adapt your behavior, and to work effectively, no matter what cultural setting you're in.
It's really about seeing cultural differences, not as a threat, but as a chance to learn something new.
A huge part of CQ is learning to understand the silent languages of culture. For example, in what we call high-context cultures, like Vietnam, most of the real message isn't in the words themselves, it's in the nonverbal cues, the relationships, the situation. But in low-context cultures, like the US, it's the opposite. We expect the message to be explicit and direct. The words are what matter most. Geert Hofstede's famous research gives us a great way to map these differences. Let's take individualism. The United States scores the highest of any country in his original study. We really emphasize personal goals and individual achievement. Now compare that to a more collectivist culture like Japan, where the good of the group is what's truly most important.
Or let's look at another dimension, masculinity. Now, this isn't about men versus women. It's about whether a society values assertiveness and materialism, what we call masculine values, over things like feelings and quality of life, which are feminine values. Japan scores super high on this scale, while a country like Sweden scores very, very low. Just knowing that one thing tells you so much about a culture's priorities.
I absolutely love this comparison. Just listen to these two sayings. On one side, you have, the nail that sticks up will be hammered down. And on the other, the squeaking wheel gets to grease. One is all about fitting in and not causing trouble. The other is about speaking up to get what you need. These aren't just cute phrases. They are deep, powerful scripts for how to behave in a culture.
And that contrast perfectly explains this idea of tight versus loose cultures. Tight cultures, like Japan or Korea, have really strong, clear social rules, and there's a lot of pressure to conform. But loose cultures, like the US or Australia, have more ambiguous rules and a much higher tolerance for people who break them or just do their own thing.
Okay, so we've looked at personal bias, we've looked at the workplace, and we've looked at global cultures. What does all this actually mean for you? Well, it all comes down to building your own intercultural competency.
It really boils down to three core pillars. First, there's perception management. That means staying curious and trying not to judge. Second is relationship management, being sensitive and being genuinely interested in other people. And third is self-management. That's about knowing who you are and having the self-confidence to adapt without losing yourself.
Which brings us to our final question in this one. This one's for you to think about. How do you stack up? How mature are you when it comes to diversity? Are you a genuinely curious person? Can you handle the tension that naturally comes up when people are different? When you look at someone, do you see their talent or do you just see a stereotype? Being really honest with yourself on these questions, well, that's the first and most important step you can take.